Welcome to Karen's Conversations number 32, and continuing the trend talking about organizational change management. But before we do that, I just have to point out for people who do follow me on Karen's Conversations, they'll notice that I'm not sitting where I usually do. I'm usually sitting in my study, but major renovations going on at the moment. So I've been moved into the dining room. So in talking about renovations, we're going to talk about the sort of renovations we might want to be making to organizational change management. And I've called Karen's Conversations 32 Wonder Woman on Change. Now, I'll tell you why. I'll give you a little bit of why, and then I'm going to ask Wonder Woman to explain herself. So I attended a deep dive or a think tank back last year, June in last year, talking about the future of change management. And one of the awesome presenters was Wonder Woman herself, Dr. Jen Frahm, who came on dressed as Wonder Woman. So I'm going to welcome Jen. She's been so kind to give us her time to talk about organizational change management. And I'll throw to Jen to introduce herself and tell us why you're Wonder Woman.
Thanks, Karen. Real pleasure to be here with you today. So thank you so much for inviting me on. Look, I'm a change management consultant, and I work with leaders to help them bring about lasting change in their organisations and to minimise the risks of bringing in that change. You know, how can we actually bring it in with the least impact to the business in terms of, you know, in a positive sense. Wonder Woman, where does Wonder Woman come from? Look, it's really interesting because that actually wasn't a self-appointed moniker, really, for me, other than to say I've been a huge Wonder Woman fan for all of my life. And when we came to that think tank, it was probably timely. We had the Wonder Woman movie out, and it struck me that there was probably a little bit that Wonder Woman could offer the change community and thinking about how we do change. And so I just had a little bit of fun with it, really, but it kind of grew a life of its own. And I now have people messaging me regularly with photos of Wonder Woman paraphernalia. And it's not unusual to have Wonder Woman paraphernalia around the place with me. But it's strangers are messaging me all over the place with, look, I saw this and I thought of you. And I went, well, if it's not so much thinking of me, but the messages of what Wonder Woman can offer the change community, that's not a bad thing.
That's awesome. That's awesome. I need to think of something. I need to find a persona so people send me stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's gorgeous.
Excellent. So, Jen, you recently wrote a blog called Can't Manage Change, Please. Mm-hmm. And this was following a little rant that our friend Tim Creasy, who's the Chief Innovation Officer at ProSci, had about people like moi who are saying things like change management is broken. And what I mean by that is that I think the tools and techniques that we're still bestowing practitioners with, and you and I had a conversation recently on social about this, but I just think that they're outdated and they're not helping people when they're going into organizations that have become truly, let's say, agile or fast, and it's increasingly in speed. So that's why I'm not saying we don't need it. We absolutely do, or I'm doing myself out of a job if I do. But what's your take then on that? Is it that we expect the practitioners to look at what they've been given and adapt, or do the tools need to be brought up to date?
Yeah, okay. I think there are three big picture items of why I object to that narrative that change management is broken or change management is dead. And I think they can be summarized around, first of all, the minute you start using that narrative, you give leaders and managers permission not to do change management, and you legitimize forgetting about it, right? And it's not dead, it's not broken. We have as much need for change management now as we've ever had in the past, if not more. And so I get very, very nervous about that narrative being public for the sake of it gives excuse for really bad leadership out in the organisations. That's not people-centric. The second is I acknowledge that part of this debate is around the term change management, and people assuming that management means controlling. And so where you and I both agree is that, no, neither of us think that we can control change. But my argument is, if you go back to the origins of change management, or particularly from an organisational perspective and OD perspective, it was never about controlling. It was management is facilitation. It's, there's a whole raft of activities that come under management. And to some extent, we're naive. We can't exercise some level of control. It's just we control in a different way, to a dictatorial, we'll do this 1, 2, 3. The third area, which I think is the piece that I've probably been reflecting on since the Twitter chat in the last couple of days.
Yeah.
I think there's real folly in expecting change practitioners to pick up agile change methodologies without a grounding of the origins and an understanding of what old change looks like. And the reason why is that a lot of agile change management practices are a shorthand. And it's very hard to learn shorthand if you don't know the English language first.
Yeah, good point.
And because I think this was one of my first learnings when I started to get into agile change. I was like, how the hell would you know how to do this if you actually didn't know what it was to write a 40-page change strategy and communication plan? How would you know what to chuck out and what to keep in? And so I think this is really the challenge for people who are new into the industry, who are going and doing their lean change certification or whatever it is, that kind of thing, without actually having the exposure to the fundamentals of what you and I would see as old-fashioned change now.
Yeah.
So to pick at the popular methodologies, I'm really comfortable with people knowing those popular methodologies, because they're the best we've got at the moment of explaining people an end-to-end process of change. Now, once you've got that under your wings, or, that you actually understand that really well, then you can start adapting and creating shorthand. But if you actually don't know what you do in an end-to-end change process, but you've got all these cool, shiny tools, you're going to do as much damage as someone who's only relying on a step-by-step process.
Yeah.
So that's where, I've sort of been thinking the last couple of days. I said, look, I think the core of this is people not knowing the basics, and so I think that's probably more so than they're outdated or not useful. I actually think they're very useful once you know what they are, to let them go.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's fair enough. I think, my audience when I was sort of writing what I'm writing was primarily sort of existing change practitioners, to say, guys, we need to start thinking about the way we do things. And I mean, the core of what we have in a communications plan and a training plan, a resistance management plan, the core content is still valid. It's just that we need to write it in a different way and present it in a different way. And it was interesting. I was at a breakfast seminar this morning, and there was quite a few people from one of the big 4 banks, and it was a presentation on change or agile. It was really a presentation more on agile. But the question kept coming up from a couple of people who kept saying, but how do we identify the what's in it for me when we don't know what the outcomes are going to be? And they were really struggling with that. And I wanted to jump in and say something, because you don't have to anymore, but that wasn't my place to do that. But that's what I'm seeing. They're still having the mindset of, I have to absolutely know the outcome in order to manage and prepare people for change. But the fact is, what we'd have to prepare them to, for me, is the world in which we don't know what the final outcome is going to look like. We know what the overall direction probably is, but we don't actually know. And it's trying to get that mind shift of a 12-month project where it's defined, we know the go live date, we know everything, to a world in which we just don't know those things anymore.
And I think the real difficulty for a lot of practitioners trying to work with Agile is that a lot of those Agile initiatives can't even tell you what the high-level vision is. And so it's bad quality. And so we're trying to overlay Agile change with bad quality agile practitioners.
Yeah.
And so, because, you know, I see it myself, it is actually a real, you know, the piece of work that I'm working on at the moment, it is an absolute struggle to get an articulation of what the high level vision is. Forget about what the final, you know, I don't care about that. Can we just, you know, it's actually, that's where the challenges is the rush. You know, I think we're seeing as much damage with the rush to adopt agile without, again, a solid understanding of what it is that we're doing and how we're doing it, you know.
Yeah,
and
because you and I heard, you and I have heard, you know, the organisations. I've just come out of one, which will remain nameless, a government organisation that said, oh, you know, we're doing agile, but with a little a, you know, and I said, that's an excuse for not doing it correctly. You know, you either do it, you have an agile mindset, which is the little a, as we know, and but yeah, and just the latest, you know, shiny thing, and let's do it, and let's not do it well. And then as change practitioners, we've got to try and embed ourselves or overlay ourselves into something that's already broken or not working very well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's you know, I'm completely empathetic to anybody who's going through that. It's tough, but you know what? We had the same problem with waterfall, right? When we had bad waterfall projects, we were still in pain there. So
yeah, absolutely.
Perhaps it's
just happening faster.
And a different vocabulary. Pain. Yeah, a different vocabulary too. That, you know, we have to learn new language. Yeah,
absolutely. And when we had that conversation, when you were talking about what would we call it? Can't to manage change, please. Our friend Jason Little got involved. Jason Little of Lean Change, and he was talking about communications, and he was sort of siding on what I was saying, but and I think for the, you know, it's a lot of the semantics we were talking about. But he said he's quite surprised when, you know, we've got practitioners who talk about communications and they see it as newsletters and emails and those things, and then he runs a session about lean coffee, which just sort of blows their minds away, and it's like, really? It is a great concept, and it is different, but it just seems such a far away from what they're used to. So how do we get our organizational change practitioners to start thinking outside the square and, you know, agilizing their practices if they need to?
I thought that was a really good example of exactly what I'm talking about going back to basics, right? Because you look at when most initiatives hire somebody to do change comms at the moment, they're using a change analyst. So somebody who has no background in communication, because what Jason's talking about is not new, right? Anybody with a comms background has been doing that kind of engagement and facilitation and work for 40 odd years. So that, you know, that's really old school organizational communication. It's got a great packaging and an excellent frame on how you can use it now and a need for it, but it's not a new practice. But if you've only ever come into your initiative as a change analyst, you've had no vocational training in communication, you don't belong to IABC or any of the communication associations, so you're not doing any professional development about comms, you're not going to know about it, right? Yeah. So, you know, if we get to the question of how do we have our organizational change practitioners agile-ise, I don't know if that's a word, but anyway.
I think we just made that up.
We just made it up. They're going to agile-ise. You know, we've got to start with what is the original practice here. Now, Jason has just educated beautifully a whole generation of change practitioners who don't know nothing about comms. You know, I remember 10 years ago, it was really standard to be hiring people for change communications. These days, it's not. We've got all this two-for-ing going on. We want a 2-for-1. We want a change analyst who can do the comms as well. Or, you know, the change manager has to be able to do the comms as well, those kind of things. And so in eliminating or not recognising the professional discipline, we create those problems in terms of not being able to do it well. And then, you know, it is necessary to have this great packaging so these people can pick up what's pretty much a basic thing for comms people to do. It's go and chat to people, you know.
Yeah. How radical would that be?
Radical. Truly radical.
Talk to people and listen to what they've got to say.
Yeah.
So give us an idea of some of the things you've done from an OCM space when you've, and I actually don't think, we're talking agile, but I think a lot of the things we're seeing and a lot of things that you're doing as well, Jen, are just as applicable if you're working on a waterfall project when you're talking about making things visible, and so tell us about some of the things that you've been doing.
Yeah, look, and I think so. As I got more exposure to lean management and lean practices, that certainly influenced what I was doing. I think that from an organisational change perspective. So I'll still do, at the beginning of an initiative, I'll still do a pack which goes through strategy approach. It'll have a comms plan on a page. It'll have, the training and development needs on a page. It'll have these kind of things, and then it's positioned as a work out loud document. So it's something that is subject to change. It's not about people signing off. It's about starting conversations around, it's a sense-making device. So I think there's a difference now in how I position artifacts, and you have to excuse me. I've got a cat, Audrey Autumn.
Hello, Audrey.
She gets very cranky when I talk to people on any of these kind of chats, and I've tried everything to try and stop her butting in, but she's decided that she is the advisor on change. So don't mind me if I knock her down a few times. See, Wonder Woman never had to deal with this.
No.
Where was I? Okay, so the visual management, just changing the framing around something of, I need you to sign off on this, to actually we need to have a chat about this, and does this fit with your expectations, and what am I missing? So also that positioning from yourself of not having all the answers. So once upon a time we would have gone in as the experts on change, and now it's actually we're facilitating conversations of understanding. So I think that's a big part. So using your data, so the evidence-based activity, being able to do MVPs of whatever the change activities are. Things like we're going to do a really major comms out to everybody, then running a test of that to, A/B split testing with multiple audiences to understand which copy is actually resonating before we send it to 30,000 people. Using those kind of practices. And I like to think that if you actually sit down and work through what the agile values are and then the principles are, and then actually sit down with the work you do and say, well, what of this could I apply and adapt and test, and that really is my practice. So it changes from client to client, really, in terms of what they need. And we're having a laugh this week because I've put up a change Kanban on my second. I've got two computer monitors at my desk, and I don't use my second monitor, and I put a change Kanban up there, which is driving everybody nuts because they want the third monitor. But I'm like, no, because now they're all coming over to have a chat about what's on the Kanban from a change perspective. So that being able to work out loud in a way that is frustrating all the techies, but still generating conversations. That's
absolutely.
That's what it's about. Yeah, you got to have fun with it too, right?
Yeah, and I love the thing I think you talked about, and I've seen this happen in clients I've worked with, that as soon as you make something transparent and it's big and it's in a high traffic area, even if you could actually deliberately put up a change scorecard or where you think people are on the change journey, or whatever language you want to use, and deliberately get it wrong, because people will start to compass and go, you know what, Karen, I don't think that's right. I think that department are really a red and not a green, and they'll start doing your job for you. And it's just so powerful. And it's like you say, Jen, it starts those conversations. Well, why do you think that? Well, I had a meeting with them yesterday and they were very, this, or I had a workshop and they were all over it. They're green, they're ready to go. So the more visibility, the more people will help.
Yeah, for sure. Absolutely. And I think that's one of the hardest things for change practitioners to come to terms with is they don't have to have all the answers, because I say the dirty secret is that anybody who works in change is that we're control freaks, right? And that's why we get into change, is we want to control things. because we don't like change. But so that's a big mindset change for change practitioners, is that you actually don't need the answers.
That's right, because other people will absolutely help you. But you have to work out loud so they can do that. They don't know what you're doing if you're scurrying away writing a 50-page comms, package and waiting for someone to sign it off, like you say. So Jen, you spoke recently at the 13th CEO and Chair Symposium in Hobart, and you were talking about how leaders can juggle the business as usual BAU alongside transformation. And you said there was 5 qualities that leaders need to make a difference. So can you briefly just tell us what those were?
Yeah. Look, that was a nice piece of work to do, because when I got asked to answer that specific question, I started down the path of thinking, okay, well, what's the change methodology that helps them? What's the, and I actually, I don't think there is a methodology as such that helps you juggle BAU and transformation. It becomes an internal, an internal guide for yourself. And how do you manage yourself through that challenge of juggling? And so once I actually reflected on that, and I thought, so this was it was an association of association chairs and CEOs, so people who all ran all the big associations in Australia. And way back in the mid-90s, I was actually the executive officer of a non-profit association. So it was like this big deja vu moment for me. And I was like, this full circle returning to where I was, 20 years ago. And so I was actually able to look at it and go, well, what would have really helped me back then when I, hadn't done the work and hadn't done the personal development around it. And so for me, it was courage, the quality of courage, being able to particularly generate micro moments of courage. So not big bravery, but the small moments of courage that enable you to be decisive or to say no to somebody that you want to say yes to. Vulnerability, the link between getting comfortable with vulnerability in order to create followership. And so people will actually, help you during change for that reason. A tolerance for embracing uncertainty. So seeing uncertainty as an opportunity rather than something that you need to lock down. What else do I have? Mindfulness. So the power of actually being able to manage your own state during that juggling act. And then finally, curiosity. So again, a way of managing the threat of the juggling. So looking at things and actually getting really relentlessly curious with what's coming your way, with a view to, is there a better way to do it? So yeah, they were the 5 qualities that emerged.
Yeah, I really enjoyed reading about that, and again, I'll put a link in the notes. And last year, you created an Agile Leadership Program with Simon Terry. So, what's that all about?
Oh, look, that was really fun, and that's been a really nice piece of work to work with Simon. So Simon and I work together in the Change Agents Worldwide Network, which is a network of change agents who are either enterprise-based, so they actually work in organisations, or they're solo like myself. And we work behind the scenes and we collaborate. It's really quite a unique community. So, you can be having an issue with a client and you'll share it, and other consultants will come back, or enterprise, change directors will come back and say, well, have you tried this? And then we work together from a commercial perspective as well. So we'll share leads and look for opportunities. One of the things Simon and I had been discussing was, in this journey to move leaders towards business agility, we felt that there was something missing, which was to dip your toe in the agile waters. So most companies seem to have to go from a pitch process with agile consultants to scaling agile, where we were saying, well, what could we actually have them doing that was a relatively small investment of time that would give them the chance to explore the concepts of agile leadership? And so we pulled together a workshop which really covers agile, it covers adaptive leadership, it covers design thinking, and a bit of neuroscience as well. And then within that workshop, we give them the opportunity to come up with some experiments. So borrowing from, Lean Startup, some experiments and a canvas on real world issues for them. And we containerize it from a time perspective, and have continuing coaching on those issues to actually see, well, how did that play out? At the end of that, you can then look at that to say, well, what elements of this, of this agile world do you think would be of benefit to you? Based on the experiment that you ran with, did you get a better outcome? And often, when leaders see that actually that really worked, that approach, then they're more comfortable with scaling agile. So yeah, that's the piece of work that we've done it for a few companies now, and it's going really well, the feedback we're getting from it. So it's great.
Excellent. Sounds really good. Sounds really good. I like that idea, just giving them that, that taste and to have a go, having, yeah. Now, also last year, you launched Conversations of Change. So now tell us, what were the drivers for you writing that?
Yeah, the driver, look, it came about from, I guess, two directions. I've been blogging for nearly 10 years now, and people had said for ages, you need to write a book. You need to write a book. They enjoy the post. You need to write a book. And I've been really, well, look, what's the book that hasn't been written? Because, there's a lot of books on change out there.
Yeah.
And I'm like, well, why would this be of any value? And it wasn't until I was spending some time reflecting on that, and I realized that the most common query I get on my contact form on my website goes along the lines of, hi, I've just been put in charge of this change. I've just Googled change management and I can't make sense of it. Can you coach me? Which is one of the lines of service that I offer. And I was sitting there, and because I was looking at the past 2 years' clients, I was like, they've all come in on this level of, I need help making sense of change, and so that I can feel more confident. And so that became the framework for what the book was about. Really, if you're relatively new to change and thinking about how do you make sense of everything that you're going to find online about change, and excuse me, how can you? So the book is structured in 3 sections. It's, the startup and sort of clarity on what it means to start a change initiative. Then the nuts and bolts of what great change looks like once you're in the moment. And then what the future direction. So how do you make sense of all of these things that are on the periphery of change that people will be throwing at you? And one of the things I was really conscious of is the experience I've seen with my clients is that they're rarely situated in, set up for success. And so I've written it with an organising structure of choose your own change adventure. So setting up 4 scenarios that they might be in, and then how would they interpret each chapter based on the scenario or the adventure that they're in. So, you've got everything from the do-it-yourself to actually you're the hands-off sponsor of the initiative.
Yeah. Awesome. Well recommended. And I know they can go to your website, Conversations of Change, and get it there as well. So what does the rest of 2018 hold for Dr. Jennifer? Yeah,
look, I think there's a number of speaking engagements coming up, which is awesome. I really enjoy the speaking work. We've got a few more facilitation pieces coming up. There's some hardcore roll your sleeves up delivery of change in a couple of companies. But I think from a high level, one of the things I'm looking to do with Conversations of Change is actually build out more webinars and look at more material that, we can really build change capability in terms of how do people build their knowledge in change. And maybe this satisfies this need of actually getting back to basics before you jump onto the agile. So that's the product pipeline of Conversations of Change. And the other thing will be I'll be launching a Dr. Jen Frahm website and really focusing on the work I do with leaders on that. So sort of getting a little bit more clarity between the brand offerings is what the rest of the year.
Awesome.
I think that'll be enough for now.
I think that's enough. It is in, we're all looking at May, approaching rapidly. So, yeah. So now in terms of talking about speaking, on next week, on Monday, Tuesday, it's Convergence Australia 2018. And you will be speaking, I think it's day one. Is it the end of day one or two?
Yeah, end of day one. That point when everybody's really exhausted and just waiting.
And you're standing between them and drinks and all that sort of thing, yeah. So give us a little snippet, give us a little taste of what you're going to tell everybody.
I don't want to give too much away.
No, don't.
As code for, hey, it's not done yet. The topic is don't give the roadie the mic. So you'll be familiar with one of our most fond phrases is change managers are the roadies, not the rock stars. And I thought it would be interesting to have a look at why change leaders don't step up to front of stage, and then what the roadies can do about it. Because it's not that unusual a circumstance for us to be in.
Yeah, absolutely. Awesome. So I'm looking forward to that. So if anyone wants to come along and meet you and meet myself and all the other people around change, if you're in Melbourne next Monday, Tuesday, then definitely pop along, and I'll put a link to the Convergence Australia website in the notes as well. So Jen, it's been a real pleasure. Thank you so much for making the time in I know it's a really busy schedule that you have, and I look forward to seeing you on Monday.
Indeed. Thank you so much for the time, Karen.
Your pleasure.